What is moon bump theory?
Well, basically, it suggests that Meghan didn't actually give birth to these children and that she was wearing a prosthetic bump. And of course, lots of medical experts have come out looking at that video and saying it's just impossible for someone who's literally 9 months pregnant and about to give birth to dance in that way.
She delivered it like an actress delivered it, and opera responded going, wow.
Something big just dropped, and it's louder than anyone expected. After years of whispers, side-eyes, and quiet talk, royal photographer Arthur Edwards is finally stepping up and saying what a lot of people have been thinking about Meghan Markle. This isn't coming out of nowhere, it's been building for a long time, and now it's out in the open. This has people locked in everywhere. This isn't just random gossip or internet noise. Arthur Edwards has spent decades behind the camera, catching some of the most iconic royal moments ever. He's seen everything up close, no filters, no edits, no spin. And now he's speaking in a way that's hard to brush off. People have questioned Meghan's moves, her image, and how things really went down behind palace doors, and this just adds more heat. What Arthur is sharing brings a whole new angle to the story. It makes you stop and think, was there more going on this entire time? The timing feels interesting too. Why speak now after being mostly quiet for so long? What changed? And what did he actually see that pushed him to finally say something out loud? This isn't the clean, polished version people are used to hearing. It's raw, it's detailed, and it's already got people talking heavy.
Oh, I was there, hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a worst royal engagement I ever did, a royal wedding I ever did.
Are you buying that excuse that Meghan Markle used a fake belly to protect her real belly? I'm not buying this.
Actually, this does look like a moon bump to me.
Royal life usually moves in silence, built on traditions that go back generations. Everything is slow, controlled, and carefully managed. Every step is planned, every appearance shaped for the public over time, but the moment Meghan stepped into that world, the whole vibe shifted almost overnight. She didn't follow the usual playbook. Instead of blending in, she came in with a modern, high-visibility style that felt bold and impossible to ignore. It wasn't about fitting into the system, it was about standing out in a space that barely ever changes. Her approach leaned into visibility in a different way, mixing emotional storytelling, carefully picked moments, and sharp timing that kept people watching closely. This created a completely different kind of attention. It wasn't just about formal royal duties anymore. It became more about personal narrative and how her story was being told. That contrast alone had people talking, because it didn't match what the public had been used to seeing for decades. Now here's where things really started raising eyebrows. When it comes to royal pregnancies, there's usually a clear and familiar pattern. Public appearances, photographers documenting every stage, and a steady flow of images that give that classic royal moment people expect without even thinking about it.
And I travelled the world with him, and I did really enjoy working with him. But, you know, now I really don't care if I ever see him again, because the way he's behaved towards the king and our queen and his brother and his sister-in-law is appalling.
Meghan Markle has posted a cringy video of her and Prince Harry dancing in a hospital.
But this time, that usual pattern didn't show up the way people expected. It wasn't just a small change, it felt like a major part of the process was missing completely, and that's where things started getting people confused. Arthur Edwards, a photographer who has documented the royal family across generations, shared something that added even more questions to the mix. He said he was told to keep his distance during that period. This is someone who has been present for some of the biggest and most personal royal moments ever, from major public events to quiet, intimate glimpses of Princess Diana. His access has always been part of how the public connects to these moments, so hearing that he was suddenly kept away had people seriously paying attention. That one decision didn't just limit access, it changed the entire experience. The usual connection between the public and royal milestones built through photography was suddenly gone. Without that familiar lens, everything felt different, almost incomplete. It created a gap that people couldn't quite explain, and that mystery only made curiosity grow even stronger about what was really happening behind the scenes. But here's where it takes another turn. Even without the traditional photo coverage, the attention didn't fade at all, it just shifted direction. Instead of those classic media moments, the spotlight moved toward controlled platforms like interviews, documentary-style features, and major media deals. Meghan stayed highly visible, just through a completely different channel. That kind of shift doesn't just happen randomly, it shows a clear change in how attention was being handled. She didn't just enter the royal family, she stepped straight into the center of modern media and figured out how to navigate it fast. Almost every move felt sharp and intentional. Whether she was speaking out, appearing in public, or even choosing silence, people weren't just watching anymore, they were trying to figure out the reason behind every move.
You're gonna see or hear Meghan Markle's belly pop. You're gonna see these people's faces. And I can tell you that one of these people is now speaking out.
I agree. I'm not a Meghan Markle fan, and I don't defend her. And there's all sorts of inconsistencies and hypocrisies. But you know, she's an actress. She's not the brightest cookie in the basket. There's no way Kate would do anything like that.
This situation goes way beyond titles, ceremonies, or royal tradition. It starts to look like something bigger, a shift in how public image is controlled at a much higher level. And one question kept coming up again and again: why are there so few widely recognized natural pregnancy photos of Meghan Markle? That's not some small detail in the royal world. So when Arthur Edwards finally spoke after staying quiet for so long, it only turned the volume up on that question even more. Royal stories usually follow a very familiar script. Big announcements, public excitement, cameras flashing from every angle, and those iconic balcony moments people remember for years. It's a pattern the public expects without even realizing it. But this time, the story didn't kick off with that same energy. It felt different right from the start. Instead, there was a noticeable gap, a shift in how things were shown, and a level of media distance that stood out almost instantly. When you look at the contrast, it really gets people talking. When Kate Middleton steps, it quickly turns into a massive media moment. Photos everywhere, headlines rolling out fast, coverage moving like clockwork. But when Meghan stepped out, the reaction felt completely different. The tone shifted, access got tighter, and it seemed like the usual media flow slowed down all at once. That difference didn't slide under the radar. Arthur Edwards, with over 40 years of experience capturing the royal family up close, saw that shift clearly. This isn't someone guessing from the outside, he's been there for major events and deeply personal milestones. His work has shaped how people view the monarchy over time, so when he points out that something felt off, people listen closely. And according to him, when Meghan's major life chapter was unfolding, the usual structure just wasn't there. No standard photo opportunities, no familiar media setup, no clear access for the press to capture those expected moments. Instead, there was a kind of silence, but not the calm, routine kind. This felt different. The kind that makes people stop and start asking questions immediately. And here's the twist: that silence didn't reduce attention, it amplified it. It pulled people in even more, creating curiosity that constant coverage sometimes can't match. The less people saw, the more they wanted to understand what was really happening behind the scenes.
I mean, obviously, when William was born and Harry was born and George and Charlotte and Louis, we got great pictures outside the hospital. I remember, and William and Catherine especially, they made such an effort to show the whole world their new baby. Archie Harrison, Mountbatten Windsor, was the name, and had nothing to do with the royal family.
Do you remember when Diana was delivering Harry or William? There was complete quiet. No one knew. Cameras couldn't get even anywhere near the hospital.
Sure, but we
let
didn't
alone
have
in the
mobile
room.
phones then.
What?
We didn't have mobile phones then.
But it was so private, and there's a dignity with privacy.
Yes.
And I certainly wouldn't, if I were pregnant, dance like well I can't.
For someone often linked to sharing personal experiences and shaping her own story, this approach felt like a sharp contrast. It wasn't just about being less visible, it was about changing the entire way visibility even works. That shift didn't go unnoticed. Even experienced photographers and media insiders were left trying to figure out what caused such a clear change in how everything was handled. The questions didn't just pop up, they spread fast and kept building. People started wondering what was really happening behind the scenes. Was this about protecting personal space, or was it something more calculated, like controlling every part of the narrative? Those are two completely different situations. Privacy is expected at that level, no doubt, but when it starts to look like full restriction, people catch on immediately. And when that kind of control lines up with official systems and tightly managed coordination, it creates even more attention. It stops feeling like a normal adjustment and starts looking structured, almost strategic. That's when things shift from casual curiosity into full-on analysis, with people trying to piece everything together step by step. At the same time, Meghan didn't disappear from the spotlight at all. In fact, she stayed visible, but in a very controlled, intentional way. Appearances were selective, content felt curated, and every moment shown to the public seemed chosen for a reason. Nothing looked random, so people were still seeing her, just not through the usual royal access they had been used to for years. That difference made everything feel even more intense. On one side, you had the traditional royal system, usually open to media coverage during major life events. On the other, a modern approach built on timing, precision, and tight control over what actually gets released. This wasn't just a minor change, it felt like two completely different approaches colliding at the same time. On one side, the traditional royal system, and on the other, a modern, tightly controlled way of handling visibility. And while all of that was happening, the media didn't back off. They pushed in even harder. Questions kept coming, speculation kept growing, and the demand for real answers got stronger by the day as expectations started stacking up fast. Right in the middle of all this, Arthur Edwards stayed patient, watching everything closely. He was waiting for that one defining image, the kind that usually clears things up and locks a moment into royal history. But that moment never came. And that absence made everything feel even more unusual, because in royal history, those key images almost always exist. They become part of the timeline, something people remember for years. So when that expected moment didn't show up, it stood out more than constant media coverage ever could. The gap became the story, and then suddenly everything shifted again. It started with a short clip, just a few shaky seconds, but it spread fast and grabbed attention instantly. In that moment, Meghan Markle, visibly pregnant, lowers into a squat, rises back up, and turns with a level of ease that caught people off guard. The clip kept getting replayed over and over, with viewers trying to figure out exactly what they were seeing.
The thing that strikes me is her lack of understanding and recognition of the role that she had or has in the royal family. And, you know, both of them have been on the record repeatedly saying they don't want to be living their lives through the lens of a camera and in a goldfish bowl and all of that. And then they take the camera into the most private of rooms where you're about to deliver your baby.
The internet didn't waste a single second jumping on it. Online communities moved fast, breaking everything down frame by frame like it was a full investigation. People paused the clip, zoomed in, slowed it down, and replayed it from every possible angle. What looked like a simple, everyday movement suddenly turned into a full-blown debate, pulling in thousands of opinions from all directions. Almost instantly, some viewers started questioning what they were seeing, wondering if that kind of movement matched their expectations. Others pushed back just as hard, saying clearly that every pregnancy is different and shouldn't be forced into one standard. That back and forth created a clear divide, and that split only made the conversation louder and more intense. Then came the flood of extra opinions. Medical perspectives started getting mentioned, personal experiences were shared, and suddenly everyone had something to say. Platforms like Twitter and Reddit filled up fast, with users building timelines, comparing clips, and stacking theory on top of theory like they were solving a mystery. And it didn't slow down, it kept growing by the hour as more people jumped in. Over on YouTube, creators took it even further, turning that short clip into long, detailed breakdown videos. They replayed moments, analyzed small details, and treated the whole situation like it needed a deeper explanation. What started as a quick viral moment didn't stay small for long. It turned into extended content, non-stop discussion, and a wave of attention that just kept circulating without slowing down. The tone shifted just as fast as that clip spread. What should have been a moment of celebration quickly turned into something else. Curiosity, doubt, and non-stop questioning took over the conversation. Headlines leaned hard into the mystery angle, pulling even more attention into the situation, and the more people talked about it, the bigger it got. At the same time, barely anything came from official sources. Responses stayed limited, and there was no clear move to shut down the growing noise online. That silence didn't calm anything, it did the exact opposite. It made people even more curious, and without clear answers, speculation rushed in to fill the gap and kept building momentum. Meanwhile, Meghan's public image still showed up looking polished and tightly controlled. Photos and videos had soft lighting, clean visuals, and carefully presented moments that felt more like styled features than natural, unplanned glimpses. Everything looked intentional and refined. And that only made some viewers look even closer, searching for something more real and unfiltered. Then another detail dropped, and it added a whole new layer to everything. Arthur Edwards revealed that photographers had been given clear instructions to avoid certain angles and specific moments. That one statement hit hard. It completely changed how people started looking at everything that came before it. For some, it still came down to privacy and protecting boundaries, but for others, it felt more controlled, more restricted. And once that idea entered the conversation, it didn't go anywhere. It spread fast. Theories stacked up, opinions got stronger, and the gap between different perspectives kept getting wider by the day. One question kept repeating across every platform. If everything was simple and straightforward, why did it feel so tightly managed? Why did access seem so limited during such a major moment? Those questions didn't fade, they just kept getting louder.
Meghan at the Albert Hall. How many weeks pregnant was she supposed to be? Was it about 8 weeks? And she looks as if she's at least 5 months pregnant. And also, why is the belly several shades browner than anywhere else? It's not supposed to be brown.
That tension between what people expected and what they were actually seeing kept the story alive and constantly shifting. It didn't fade out, it kept evolving with every new detail. And like every major story, there comes a moment when one new voice changes everything. But this time, that shift didn't come from an official spokesperson or some well-known royal insider. It came from someone unexpected. Someone who claimed to notice small details that never made it into the public view. She wasn't part of the royal system, had no title, no formal access, just close enough to observe but not standing in the spotlight. And the second she suggested that the public version of events might not show the full picture, everything around her started to change fast. The reaction was immediate and hard to ignore. Conversations that once felt open suddenly slowed down. Messages that would normally get replies went quiet. Opportunities to speak or share seemed to disappear without any clear reason. It created a strange atmosphere, one people could feel even if no one directly addressed it. There was this unspoken tension that settled in, not loud or obvious, but subtle enough to make people pause and think twice. It felt like a quiet signal, almost like a warning without saying a single word, that maybe certain topics weren't meant to be pushed too far, and that feeling only added more weight to everything that had already been building. For people who have followed the royal world for years, this kind of situation didn't feel completely unfamiliar. Moments like this have happened before, where even small comments or personal observations seem to bring unexpected consequences. There's already a pattern that people point to. Names like Paul Page, a former royal guard, have come up in past conversations as examples of how quickly things can shift when private experiences turn into public discussions. And once those patterns start getting noticed, it only adds another layer of intensity to everything unfolding. According to various reports, this situation seemed to follow a very familiar pattern. What started off as normal, polite communication slowly began to shift over time. Interactions that once felt easy and open became more distant, and conversations reportedly carried a different kind of weight. Opportunities that were once there suddenly started fading away without any clear explanation. But here's where things took a sharp turn. The more pressure it looked like she was facing, the more attention her claims started picking up online. Instead of disappearing, her words began spreading even faster. People locked in on one simple but powerful question. Why would such a strong reaction follow something described as a small observation? That contrast made the whole situation stand out even more. She didn't have a massive audience, no big platform, and no media machine backing her up. But somehow the attention kept growing, because sometimes attention doesn't come from reach, it comes from reaction. The way everything unfolded around her made people look twice, not just at what she said, but at how others seemed to respond to it. And that's where things started getting even more interesting. In structured environments like the royal system, loyalty and alignment have always played a huge role. It's not just about what gets said publicly, it's about staying within certain boundaries at all times. Once those lines start to feel tested, the response can shift quickly, and people watching from the outside can't help but notice.
She is literally kneeling all the way down. One of those people reached out to me, but not before this person reached out to the newspapers, complaining that the palace was literally threatening her, that the palace had tried to bribe her, and when that didn't work, because she really dislikes what's happening and she wants to come clean, and she has been trying to tell people about.
When someone steps even slightly outside that space, the response can come fast and in very controlled ways. Behind the polished images, public appearances, and perfectly timed statements, there's always a deeper system at work. Nothing about that system is random. Communication is managed, shaped, and adjusted depending on the situation. Every detail matters, from what gets shared to what gets held back, and even those moments where nothing is said at all. And in situations like this, those quiet gaps and subtle reactions can raise more questions than any headline ever could. As the conversation around Meghan kept growing, some observers started noticing a different kind of pattern forming. It didn't look like a full shutdown, it looked more like the story was being guided in a very specific direction. Not loud reactions, not public pushback, but quiet, precise adjustments happening behind the scenes, because if there's one thing the royal system has mastered over time, it's how to respond under pressure. When a tension builds, the reaction isn't chaotic or rushed, it's structured, measured, and carefully timed. That approach doesn't erase controversy, but it definitely reshapes how people see it and talk about it. It works almost like a long-established public relations machine built over generations. Every situation is handled with control, awareness, and a deep understanding of public perception. Nothing moves without purpose, nothing happens by accident, and every step connects to a bigger picture most people never fully see. And behind closed doors, reports suggested there were ongoing conversations about media strategy, adding yet another layer to how carefully everything may have been handled. Every statement had to go through layers of review before reaching the public. Nothing was rushed, nothing slipped through unchecked. Each word mattered, every sentence carried weight, and nothing moved forward unless it matched exactly how it was expected to land. That kind of pressure builds fast, because one wrong line could bring even more attention to an already growing situation. That's why responses tend to come out cautious, controlled, and sometimes very limited. And as online discussions started picking up speed, one phrase kept coming back again and again: never complain, never explain. It sounds calm, simple, almost reassuring at first, but in reality, it often leads straight to silence instead of clear answers. And that silence hits differently in today's world. Because the internet doesn't just forget and move on, once something catches attention, it stays active, shared, reposted, clipped, and brought back over and over again. Silence doesn't make the questions disappear, it can actually make them feel louder and more noticeable. While all of this was unfolding, Meghan continued building a strong and polished public image on a global stage. Her appearances, projects, and messaging stayed consistent and carefully presented. Everything looked smooth, intentional, and on point. But at the same time, back in London, things seemed far more complicated behind the scenes. Reports suggested officials were trying to balance two tough priorities at once. On one side, maintaining royal tradition, on the other, adapting to a fast-moving modern media landscape, and trying to handle both at the same time. That's not simple at all. It's a constant balancing act. They were walking a very fine line. On one side, there was pressure to protect the reputation of the monarchy at all costs. On the other, there was a clear effort to avoid looking too vmeshuishisa or overly forceful in public. That balancing act shaped a response style that felt careful, controlled, and at times almost too cautious. And when every move feels that measured, people start paying even closer attention, not just to what's said, but to what isn't said at all.
On May 6th at 3:02 a.m., Frogmore Cottage. This is a public announcement. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex used the services of a surrogate. We apologize for any misunderstandings. To this day, nobody has debunked that tweet as fake. In order for a child to be in the line of succession, it has to come from the body of the woman. Why would Meghan Markle be faking all those big stomachs? You know, that big belly, the belly swaying back and forth. She was huge. She was overdue. Now when Spare came out, we know that story is absolute horseshit.
As a result, communication started shifting in a way people could clearly notice. Statements became less direct, updates felt tighter, and the overall flow of information seemed more controlled than before. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was definitely there. It wasn't that nothing was being said, it was that everything sounded filtered and carefully measured. Press briefings started to feel more vague, with answers that didn't fully match the questions being asked. Even experienced figures like Arthur Edwards, who spent decades with close royal access, seemed to be kept at a distance. Moments that once felt open and routine suddenly looked restricted, and people picked up on that fast. That shift started to represent something bigger than just one situation. It pointed toward a wider pattern in how information was being handled behind the scenes. Nothing was directly denied or removed, but it felt like key details were being carefully managed, organized, and kept just out of reach from the public. And that kind of control doesn't go unnoticed when people are already paying close attention. At the core of it all, the monarchy has always relied on two major pillars: tradition and stability. Every move, every response, and every decision connects back to protecting those foundations, especially when public conversations start touching more sensitive topics, and when discussions began moving toward timelines, royal titles, and internal processes, the tone shifted again. These aren't small topics, they connect directly to how the entire system works and how the public understands it. That's when everything started to feel more serious, more intense, and way more closely watched than before. For generations, the line of succession and everything around it has been handled with extreme care. Even the smallest question can carry serious weight inside that system. So when online conversations started pushing into that territory, the usual calm and steady approach suddenly felt more urgent and way more tightly controlled. At one point, there were even rumors about a press secretary known for giving answers that sounded complete but didn't actually reveal much. Responses became so carefully worded that even direct questions didn't lead to clear details. People were listening closely, trying to read between the lines, but often walked away without anything solid to hold on to. History has already made one thing clear. Moments involving the royal family can turn sensitive very fast, especially when personal decisions move into the public spotlight. Situations like this have played out before, and each time they show just how quickly attention builds and how carefully everything has to be handled. But now, everything is happening in a completely different environment. This isn't the kind of era where headlines fade quietly into the background. It's a fast-moving digital space where reactions hit instantly. Clips go viral in minutes, opinions spread across platforms, and conversations don't slow down, they keep evolving in real time. And in that kind of space, every little detail matters. A single image, a quick pause, or even a small expression can be captured, shared, and analyzed again and again. What once stayed behind closed doors can now become a global topic almost instantly. The shift from private moments to public discussion happens faster than ever. Commentators aren't just watching from the sidelines anymore, they become part of the story. They react, break things down, and keep the conversation moving non-stop. What used to feel like distant tradition now starts to look more like ongoing content, with people following every update as it drops, and that's exactly where things took an even sharper turn. The focus started shifting away from traditional roles and long-term structure. Instead, it moved toward how fast public perception could flip, not over years or months, but in days, sometimes even hours. That's the reality of today's media world. Because now, it doesn't take a major event to spark a massive reaction. One unexpected moment, one short clip, or even a small inconsistency can grab attention instantly. And once it hits, it spreads fast, pulling more and more people into the conversation before anyone can slow it down. In this situation, attention locked onto a detail that most people never expected to question. Early reports said that a well-known medical professional was involved in the birth of the Sussex child. It sounded clear, structured, and exactly what people would expect from an official update. But then something didn't quite add up. A separate statement connected to the doctor's family seemed to point toward a different version of events. That contrast stood out immediately. It introduced doubt into a situation that had originally felt simple and straightforward. And once that kind of uncertainty enters the picture, it doesn't just disappear, it grows, it spreads, and it keeps people asking questions, trying to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes.
How fair do you think it is to say that this has been driven by Meghan?
I think you've got to look. Harry was the greatest of all the royals as far as we were concerned. And he suddenly turned into probably, as I say, the most unhappiest and difficult to work with. And there's only one common denominator in that, is when he got married.
Suddenly, two completely different narratives were moving at the same time. The palace presented one version, while parts of the media started pushing another. That split created instant confusion, leaving people unsure about which version actually showed the full picture. And that one inconsistency didn't just slide by, it changed everything. For a system known for being precise and tightly controlled, even the smallest contradiction can stand out in a major way. Once people noticed it, the attention didn't stay contained, it spread fast and kept gaining momentum. Online spaces reacted immediately. Conversations exploded across platforms, with users comparing timelines, official statements, and every small detail they could find. Regular viewers turned into full-on analysts, breaking things down piece by piece and trying to figure out what didn't match up. What seemed like a small detail at first quickly turned into a major talking point. It pulled even more attention into a story that was already under heavy focus. And the more people looked into it, the more questions started building and the harder it became to ignore. But instead of stepping in with clear answers, the response followed a very familiar pattern: silence. No detailed clarification, no direct correction, just a pause that felt intentional and carefully controlled. And that silence didn't calm anything down, it did the opposite. It left everything wide open, with no clear direction for the public to follow. The moment that gap appeared, it filled up fast with theories, questions, and non-stop speculation. Because when people don't get clear answers, they don't just stop, they start connecting the dots themselves. And once that process begins, the conversation takes on a life of its own and becomes impossible to contain. Every missing piece turned into something people locked onto. Every unanswered question became its own discussion, circling non-stop across platforms. And in online spaces, topics like this don't just fade away, especially when they're already under a strong spotlight. As things slowly started to settle, a bigger picture began forming. The royal system might be highly experienced when it comes to handling internal matters and controlling information, but the modern digital world plays by completely different rules. Information now moves fast. Too fast to fully control. Once attention builds, it doesn't just disappear, it keeps cycling through posts, clips, and conversations. People come back to it, break it down again, and keep the discussion alive long after the original moment has passed. There's almost an unspoken rule online. If something isn't clearly explained, it won't be ignored. It will be examined from every possible angle. And that usually leads to trending topics, repeated clips, and ongoing analysis that keeps the story active and impossible to shake. In royal tradition, silence has never really been empty, it carries meaning without needing direct explanation. It's not just about saying nothing, it's about sending a message without speaking at all. And no one understood that better than the late Queen. She didn't rely on constant public statements to shape how people saw things. Instead, she used subtle details to communicate in a way that only careful observers would catch. People who followed royal appearances closely knew that nothing was random. Every object, every position, every background detail was chosen with intention. There was always a reason behind it, even if it wasn't obvious at first glance. One moment that really stood out came during a Christmas broadcast, and it left people paying very close attention. Viewers noticed something small at first, but the impact was way bigger than it looked. A framed photo that had been there before was suddenly gone. No explanation, no mention, just empty space where it used to sit. At a quick glance, it might seem like nothing, but for people paying close attention, it didn't feel random at all. In royal settings, nothing is placed without careful thought. Every detail goes through layers of decisions, which means even the smallest change can feel intentional. That's what made this stand out so much. Some tried to explain it in a simple way. Maybe it was just a layout change or a visual refresh, but longtime watchers of royal appearances weren't fully convinced. They know how structured these moments are and how rare it is for something to shift without a reason behind it. In that world, even the smallest adjustment can carry weight. When something familiar suddenly disappears, it grabs attention instantly and gets people asking questions. And once those questions start, they don't just fade, they build, connect, and pull more eyes into the situation.
I would say step one would be to confirm this room, find out where it was, find out that very room, find out which room it was, and go look at it. If it's at that hospital or wherever it is she says she was, go make sure that's the hospital room, that it exists there, because it could be somewhere else, who knows.
It's not about what gets said, it's about what's quietly shown. That's always been the real signal. The Queen's style was never about direct responses or public back and forth. She kept everything calm, steady, and controlled at all times. Subtlety over reaction, that was the method, and it became a core part of how the monarchy handled sensitive moments. That broadcast proved just how powerful that approach could be. Without saying a single word, a quiet adjustment sent a message people couldn't ignore. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it hit exactly where it needed to. That's the system at its core. It doesn't rely on big statements or fast reactions, it runs on precision timing and carefully placed signals. No confrontation, no clear explanations, just controlled shifts that carry meaning without ever saying it directly. And over time, people have learned to recognize that pattern. When things suddenly go quiet at that level, it doesn't always mean everything is calm. A lot of times, it signals that something deeper is happening behind the scenes, and what came next only made that silence feel even more important. Most royal stories build toward a clear, highly visible moment, something the public can easily follow and understand. But this situation didn't move like that at all. Right when questions around the birth were hitting their peak, the attention suddenly shifted, and it happened fast. That kind of timing didn't go unnoticed, and it left people wondering what was really driving the change behind the scenes. Attention quickly shifted toward one specific place, Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. Almost overnight, that location became a central focus in the story. It was mentioned everywhere, so naturally, people expected something simple: clear confirmation, solid details, and an easy way to settle the growing questions. At first, it looked like that's exactly what was happening. A public congratulations message was shared online, and it seemed to line up with expectations. For a moment, everything felt clear and straightforward. But that didn't last long. Not long after, things started getting less certain. Additional comments began introducing doubt, especially as conversations around clips and timelines started spreading across platforms. What once seemed simple suddenly felt a lot more complicated, and the response that followed didn't give a clean yes or no. Instead, it leaned on general policies and timing, pointing back to guidelines that were in place during that period. The wording felt careful, structured, and tightly controlled, leaving room for different interpretations depending on how people read it. That's where everything started to get even more tangled. Because when clear answers aren't given, people don't just move on, they start digging deeper, trying to connect every detail themselves. Some saw the response as normal procedure, others felt like it was carefully avoiding specifics, and that kind of communication doesn't shut things down, it stretches everything out. Without firm clarity, the conversation keeps moving, pulling in more opinions, more breakdowns, and more analysis. And in a fast-moving digital space, that only turns up the intensity. Instead of settling the situation, that careful wording added another layer to the story and gave people even more to question. It kept people locked in, questioning, analyzing, and trying to figure out what was actually being said and what might have been left out. Online communities didn't hesitate, they jumped in fast and started digging into every detail they could find. People compared images, studied backgrounds, and zoomed in on even the smallest elements. Screenshots spread everywhere, clips got replayed non-stop, and side-by-side comparisons took over timelines across multiple platforms. What started as simple curiosity quickly turned into full-on breakdown mode. Everyday users stepped into analyst roles, examining everything from room layouts to equipment placement like they were piecing together a puzzle. No detail felt too small. Every little piece became part of a bigger picture people were trying to build. And while all of that was happening, the hospital stayed completely consistent in its response. The tone remained professional, measured, and focused on privacy policies. No extra comments, no detailed clarifications, just the same steady approach repeated over and over as the conversation kept getting louder. At the same time, Meghan's public image didn't shift at all. Every appearance, every visual, and every release stayed polished and carefully presented. That consistency stood out in a big way. Everything looked refined, controlled, and intentionally curated, and that made direct challenges harder to pin down. That contrast didn't go unnoticed, it pulled even more attention in. Because in a time where everything is shared instantly, every moment, every angle, every update, when something feels controlled like that, people notice fast and start asking even more questions. This one situation still felt like it had unanswered questions hanging over it, and that alone was enough to make people stop, pause, and look even closer, trying to figure out what might be missing. Just when it seemed like the conversation might start fading, a familiar voice pulled it right back into focus. Arthur Edwards, a photographer with decades of first-hand experience around the royal family, spoke up again, and one line hit harder than anything else. He said, "We were told to stay away." That statement carried serious weight. It wasn't just about missing photos or limited access anymore, it pointed to something much bigger. It hinted at a pattern, something that didn't just happen once but seemed to repeat across different moments and decisions, and once people heard that, it added a whole new level of intensity to everything that had already been building.
There's no stress there, not even a little bit of stress, none. And there should be there because she's getting ready to have one of the worst painful things of her life, having a baby. And when that happens, you look forward to the event, but you don't look forward to that pain. And it's so bad, a lot of women can't remember.
When people started putting everything together, the restricted access, the controlled visuals, the carefully managed responses, it stopped feeling like random decisions. It began to look more like a consistent approach playing out across different moments. And that realization only made the conversation stronger. It pulled even more attention into a story that just wouldn't settle down. When everything is lined up side by side, the limited photography, details that don't fully match, carefully worded responses, and even outside confirmations that feel slightly off, it starts forming something much bigger than just one moment. At that point, it doesn't feel isolated anymore, it feels like multiple pieces connecting into a larger picture, one that keeps pulling people back in. And that's where the real intrigue kicks in. This was never just about one image or one event, it turned into something deeper. A closer look at how a global institution manages its image while under constant public attention. In a world where people expect openness, every controlled move stands out even more. One explanation could be privacy. Public figures have every right to set boundaries, no question about it. But when those boundaries appear this tight, this consistent, and this noticeable across multiple moments, people naturally start asking more questions. That pattern becomes harder to ignore. Another angle people keep bringing up is control. Not in an extreme way, but in terms of shaping what the public sees, what gets shared, and what stays out of view. Because in today's media world, managing the flow of information can be just as powerful as the information itself, and no matter which side people lean toward, that idea keeps the conversation going strong. The outcome feels the same, there are still gaps in the story. The timeline keeps sparking debate, and people all over the world are still trying to connect the pieces. That ongoing curiosity keeps everything alive. For an institution built on visibility, tradition, and public connection, even small moments of uncertainty can stand out in a big way. And in this case, that uncertainty didn't fade, it grew. Over time, it pulled in more attention instead of settling down. This doesn't feel like a simple royal storyline anymore, it's turned into something closer to a modern media puzzle unfolding in real time. Every detail gets examined, every moment gets replayed, and every silence carries weight. That's exactly what keeps people watching, because when a story leaves room for interpretation, it doesn't end, it keeps evolving with every new perspective that enters the conversation. Now the focus shifts to one key question. What does Arthur Edwards do next? Because after everything he's already hinted at, stepping back completely doesn't seem likely, not when his words have already reignited so much attention and pulled the spotlight right back onto the situation. Arthur isn't just another voice, he's someone with decades of first-hand experience, someone who has stood just steps away from some of the most defining royal moments ever captured. That kind of background carries serious weight, and when someone like that starts opening the door, even slightly, people expect more to follow. That's where the anticipation starts building fast. There are a few paths he could take next, and every single one of them could shift the conversation all over again. He could choose to stay measured, dropping small details over time, just enough to keep people talking without fully stepping into the spotlight. That kind of move fits his careful style, giving the public pieces to think about while still holding something back. Or he could switch it up completely and go direct, a full interview, a detailed breakdown, or even a clear public statement laying everything out. Now that would shake things instantly, because at that point, it wouldn't just be speculation anymore, it would be coming straight from someone who's seen how the system works from the inside. There's also the option where he says nothing else at all, and strangely, that silence could hit just as hard. When someone with that level of access makes a statement like, "We were told to stay away," and then goes quiet, it sticks with people. It leaves questions hanging and keeps everyone wondering what else he might know and why he's holding it back. At the same time, media outlets are watching every move closely. If Arthur drops even a small follow-up comment, it could spread fast and reopen the entire conversation all over again. That's the kind of influence he has, where even one sentence can reset the tone completely. And timing? That matters just as much as the message. If he chooses the right moment to speak, especially when things start to calm down, it could pull everything right back into the spotlight instantly. So right now, everything sits in a kind of pause, but not a quiet one. It's the kind where people are watching, waiting, and trying to predict what comes next, because if Arthur Edwards steps forward again, it won't just add to the story, it could change the entire direction of it. It could completely reshape how everything is understood, and after everything covered so far, one thing stands out: this story hasn't settled at all. It's still open, still being talked about, and still raising questions people can't ignore. From the missing moments to the controlled access, and from Arthur Edwards' statements to the intense online reactions, every piece has added another layer to something way bigger than it first looked. Now it comes down to you. What do you think is really going on here? Do you see this as a clear case of privacy being protected, or does it feel more like a carefully managed narrative? And how do you take Arthur Edwards saying, "We were told to stay away"? Does that sound routine to you, or does it stand out as something unusual? And what about the media shift? Do you think the way visibility was handled changed the story completely? Or was this just a modern approach in a fast-moving digital world? And that viral clip, was it taken out of context, or did it raise fair questions worth looking into? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one of those topics where every opinion adds a new angle, and the more people break it down, the more interesting it gets. If you found this interesting, hit that like button so more people can see it. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, especially if new details start coming out. And share this with anyone else following the story, because this conversation is far from over. Stay tuned, because if anything new surfaces or if Arthur Edwards speaks again, you already know this is going to spark up all over again.